Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is the podcast for people who enjoy media about the Punisher, but know not to date a guy in a Punisher t-shirt because he's probably a Republican. This is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Ilana Brooklyn. Today's topic is The Punisher Season 1. I was extremely pleasantly surprised with the show. I'm joined by Sean T. Collins. Sean is the co-editor of the comics and art anthology Mirror Mirror 2 and a critic for the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Vulture, Decider, and many publications. He's absolutely one of my favorite critics working today. And if you are a Game of Thrones fan, his podcast, Boiled Leather Audio Hour, is a must listen. So here's the thing. I wasn't going to watch The Punisher, let alone review it. I've said many times that Punisher is supposed to be an antagonist and that any show centered on him is going to make him into a hero. And what does the Punisher do, at least in the comics? So when I was at the Delaware Beach, I saw all kinds of merchandise with the so-called Blue Lives Matter flag, which is a pro-fascist symbol imposed with the Punisher logo. There's been news stories about cops putting the Punisher logo on their cars. It's literally a symbol. The skull logo is literally a symbol used by fascists. So I was worried that the show would actually inspire that iconography to spread in a really dangerous way. And that really ended up not being what the show was about at all. It's a mini miracle, if you ask me, that it's as great as it is. And Sean's reviews for the Decider, which he did the weekly, not the weekly write-ups, but
it's recaps in the parlance of our times, but I don't like the parlance of our times. But yes, that's what they are.
Thank you. The recaps for the Decider are what convinced me to give the show a shot. So since Sean hates war and racists just as much as I do, and he really enjoyed the show too, that was the endorsement I needed to hear. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So my first question, before we get into the spoiler section, I wanted to first give folks who are doubters, the way I was, a sense of, why they should watch the show. So for folks who aren't sold on it, why do you think it's a good show to watch?
Well, I think you have to start by talking about Jon Bernthal, who plays Frank Castle, the Punisher. A lot of the Marvel Netflix shows rise and fall on the strength of the cast. And in general, they've done a very good job getting interesting work out of a whole range of actors, from Mahershala Ali, who went on to be like Oscar gold, to, Vincent D'Onofrio doing one of the weirdest supervillain turns, and I mean that in a very good way, because normally supervillains, especially in Marvel, are quite dull, as Kingpin. And I think Frank Castle is and Jon Bernthal as Frank Castle, that's as good a match between actor and role as you're going to find, particularly if you take Frank Castle in the direction that they sort of took him, which is as a Wounded Warrior. Obviously has its own meanings in culture, but I kind of classify him with Sandor Clegane, the Hound from Game of Thrones, and Hansi Dent from Fargo Season 2, and Richard Harrow from Boardwalk Empire, as these people who were trained to fight as a way of life for their country, and discovered that the ideals that they were taught they were fighting for were bullshit, and it really brought them nothing but misery to do this to people. But it's unfortunately the only thing they're any good at anymore. And Bernthal has like a soul to him. He looks like a palooka. He looks like a prize fighter who's a few years past his prime, despite being extremely handsome. I don't mean that. I just mean he just has a world weariness to him. Yeah. And it works very, very well. And I think because that really tells you the direction that the whole series goes, which is that it's not. I mean, I had the same concerns you did, obviously. Punisher, you look around, there's Blue Lives Matter Punisher things, which is hilarious when you think about it, because wasn't it crooked cops who killed his family anyway? It certainly wasn't at least one of the versions of the character.
Yeah, it was. And in the show, he kills cops. I mean, cops get killed. Like,
yep. And
it's just a thing.
Yeah, and it just took a real... It wasn't about like one last honest cop, his hands tied by the system. He's finally had enough. He's standing up to it. It's not Death Wish or Dirty Harry or really anything like that at all. This is like a sad, broken person who's like running amok because he was trained to run amok by the military, which in the Punisher series is shown consistently to be as corrupt and criminal and murderous as anything else that anyone faces in the entire Marvel Netflix universe, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it is to have taken a franchise that has this built-in fascist fan base, as you discussed, and to make it basically impossible for them to enjoy it, or at least to get that out of it. I'm sure a lot of people with Blue Lives Matter Punisher flags watched The Punisher and enjoyed it because they just didn't think that deeply about it.
Yeah.
But if you are really looking for something that speaks to your concerns as a fascist, or as a Blue Lives Matter person, this wasn't it. This ran in the face of it, which I think is really, really impressive. And almost, it's like a feat. It's like a labor to have done that,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, the performances and the writing are really amazing. And the cinematography, it just knocked my socks off in so many episodes.
Yeah, I would say that most of the Marvel Netflix shows have some visual flair to them, and The Punisher's no exception. They handled certain things very, very well. There was in particular, I'm thinking of there was a sort of traumatic raid that Frank Castle participated in when he was in Afghanistan on like an enemy compound or whatever. And there's a montage, an extremely disorienting montage of him basically gunning his way and stabbing his way and punching his way through this house full of guys who are trying to kill him, and just getting more and more upset and like screaming and yelling, and there's weird fades and jump cuts and stuttering, and there's what is it? I Wish It Was True by, is it White Buffalo?
White Buffalo, yeah. I looked it up, yeah.
An extremely sad and cynical outlaw country song about returning home as a veteran and realizing that the war you fought in was a lie and that nobody gives a shit about you. About the current conflicts that we're involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great example of like the filmmaking, the use of music, found music, the performance, the action choreography, and the ideology of the show all kind of walking hand in hand to show that it didn't take the Punisher's family getting killed to turn him into the Punisher. It just took joining the military,
Oh, yeah. And now hopefully folks are sold and we'll get into the spoiler part. So from hence on out, here to be spoilers. And another piece of that is just how much the show has so much doubling between the Punisher and some of the other main characters. Like there's a number of episode titles which sort of point to that. Like Two Dead Men is second episode is really framed as the Punisher is dead because of what has been done to him by the system, and the fact that he's had to erase himself from public view in order to survive. The Micro, who for the record is the only major Jewish character in any MCU related property. Yep, I did the count. Micro is a dead man because he had to go underground to protect his family, because he had to do and like tell on the national security state. But then, and so there's a lot of parallels between them. Punisher's family dies, Micro's family lives, and there's this other great duality between Punisher and really Russo, who the show sort of posits from out of nowhere that this is his best friend in the military, and they both had completely different. They both were traumatized, but they both had completely different approaches to what to do after the war, and also how to extricate themselves from it. You mentioned this in your reviews, but it's the funny thing with his performance is that even though his heel turn it's not even a heel turn, he's been bad all along, is completely obviously going to happen from the show's narrative structure. Mm-hmm. He's such a good salesperson of what he's saying that you have moments where you doubt that might be true at first.
Yes. Yeah, and this is a great point about to get to back to the acting, if you don't mind for a second.
Please.
Billy Russo, the who winds up being sort of the arch nemesis, who was in the Black Ops, whatever it is, with Frank Castle in Afghanistan, that was basically a front for running drugs for their bosses. He's played by Ben Barnes, who plays a similarly like handsome scumbag type character in Westworld, but there's just nothing going on with that character in Westworld until sort of the very end of season 2, where you see a side of him you haven't seen before. But until then, he just sneers. There's no writing. The writing's not there. And you're right. It's so clear that he's a bad guy, and you know that he's going to be the arch enemy. I mean, you just know it. You know it. But he's interesting enough and given enough to do, and have enough and show enough sides of himself, like just different. He's not just mean to everyone all the time for no reason. You know, he seems like in a way he actually does care about Frank and about Agent Madani, who's the DHS agent that he starts dating for a while. You know, but he just happens to be, he cares more about money and, you know, and the criminal enterprises that make him money in the end.
And he's a survivor, and that's the other thing. Like,
yeah.
But like, I thought that was so interesting where the episode, I mean, one of the great sequences, episode 7 and episode 8 are my favorites, just for the record. But anyway, episode 8, he's like sort of begins having almost this like American Psycho moment of, he's like physically arming himself with his like beauty routine to face the world for the day. And like, what is he going to do? And he's not going into negotiations with another business. He's going to go and basically torture his abusive mom. And that's also the episode where we learn about the abuse he had endured as a child. And so it's like the episode where you're like, he is a psycho killer. Also, he's an abuse victim.
Right.
And yeah.
It's just they took the time to make him a person, which I think is really crucial to drama, and particularly superhero stories. I think most of the best ones that you can think of, the villains are basically sort of co-protagonists, you know, and that's true in almost any medium. You know, the reason people talk about like for in the X-Men, like the Magneto's basically a character. He may not be a member of the team, but he's important to understanding how that team works and how that franchise works. Same with, you know, a lot of Batman's villains. I guess I would say probably the Joker in particular, but certainly several more, or Lex Luthor and Superman, things like that. And to their credit, although I think there have been mixed results, all of the Marvel Netflix shows do that. They all treat their villains as people who you wouldn't necessarily mind like following around in an episode dedicated to them. And gives them and adds some like meat to the bones of those characters. They're not just what you have in the movies of the Marvel movies, which is usually just some sort of generic big bad who's either the opposite number of the hero or some outer space tyrant. And no matter who they cast, it's pretty much the same. You know, I mean, Lee Pace was in one of those movies. People I can't even remember. Like Lee Pace was like Ronan the Accuser, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was really a waste.
And who was Malekith, the dark elf? That's another good ad. Was it Mads Mikkelsen?
Christopher Eccleston. Yeah.
Mads Mikkelsen was in one of them too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yes, he was. He was in Strange, and it was just really misused.
I didn't even see Strange, but I mean that's the thing. I couldn't. You know, it's like you could have told me he was in. Yeah, he was in the third Thor movie, and I'd be like, oh, okay, sure. You know, like I have no idea. It doesn't really matter for the most part. And the Netflix shows have done a better job of that, and you need it. You know, you need to feel like you're watching a real thing and not, you know, someone, you know, not just an expensive version of Rock'em Sock'em Robots, you know.
God, yeah. I mean, and speaking of characters where it's you have a lot of concern and feeling for them, but what they're doing is terrible. I mean, Lewis, who's like the most wounded of all veterans, really, we see. There were moments where there would be the beginning of a Lewis scene, and I would just say to myself, I don't want to watch this. Like, can we have the next one? But it's so important anyway. The actor did a tremendous job. For folks who are forgetting, because part of the reason we're doing this episode is because season 2 is coming up soon, and we know a lot of folks will need a refresher. So I'm going to try to remember to say who the hell I'm talking about if it's been a while since you've watched it. But Lewis is the young veteran who almost kills himself, almost shoots his dad by accident, and then goes on a terrorism rampage through the city. The media sets Lewis up as being the same as Punisher, and he's like incredibly, arguably the same as him, even though they were not actually in cahoots at all. And I think like Lewis was an important component of the plot, even if it was sometimes not necessarily what I wanted to see in that moment. And his interactions with the like stolen valor veteran, who, we knew he wasn't in Vietnam. He was just too young, frankly, and that kind of NRA flag waving type is usually full of it. Mm-hmm. And when stolen valor guy like leaves him to just get arrested by the NYPD for flyering.
Lewis, he's played by an actor named Daniel Weber, and he is a younger veteran who's just extremely really in the depths of PTSD and depression, and cannot function back home now that he's home at all. And he tries support groups and they don't work, and he comes very close to killing himself on a number of occasions, accidentally killing his dad almost. He digs a hole at one point in his backyard to live in because he can only feel comfortable in those kind of like cramped quarters, and dug in.
It's like a foxhole, but it's also a grave.
Yeah,
right?
And there's so much of this material before he starts doing anything sort of grandiose and dangerous to society. There are just so many scenes of just this kid by himself or in the support group that's run by another friend of Frank's, who's one of the few people who knows he's still alive following, I think, the events of Daredevil season 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the material is strong enough to be in just a drama where there is nobody with a cool code name who like fights people for a living. Mm-hmm. I really thought it was almost unnecessarily well done, considering what they could have gotten away with the show being. And I think that's kind of the story over and over again. I feel like I'm sort of in this recursive loop where I'll talk about one aspect of the show and then I'll say, and then that was really good. It was better than it needed to be, just like this thing and just like that thing. But that's kind of how it worked. It was just repeatedly more interesting, more humane, more detailed, more driven by recognizable human concerns and human behaviors than it needed to be. Now, there's always going to be a hard line in superhero stuff about how relatable and believable and recognizable, I guess that's really the word to use, as human it can get, because just there are no superheroes and there really aren't any costumed vigilantes, not in the Punisher, Batman mm-hmm. kind of sense, So everyone's taking a sort of leap of faith, not just about whatever science fictional or fantasy aspects are involved, but just in the basic premise of like, do people who are sufficiently motivated train themselves, put on a costume, come up with a cool nickname, and go out and fight crime? They don't. So you're always going to have to take a little bit of a flyer with that. Putting that aside, though, this show did everything it could to make everything else as sound and and fleshed out as it could be. There's Lewis, there's Billy Russo, and how much better that character is than it could otherwise be, or that similar characters played by that actor have been. Mm-hmm. Like you said, there's micro who's played by Eben Moss-Bachrach, who was the horrible Marnie's horrible boyfriend in later seasons of Girls, who's maybe like the single best satire of like Williams-bro culture ever. Just like the most lethally toxic dude. And here he is completely like playing completely against that type. He's a family man. He's has a career in the NSA that he turns on when he comes across evidence of like criminality. So here again, you're taking a show that has a built-in Blue Lives Matter fan base and making one of the heroes Edward Snowden, or / Chelsea
Thank
Manning.
you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It again, why? Because you're thoughtful writers and filmmakers, I guess, and thought that would be interesting, and you were right. And yeah.
No, the performance was so good too. And actually, this gives me, I want to shout out one particular, and it seems small, but it's really not, way in which I really loved how they used micro. Like, first I'll just drive back to say, like, the scene where Frank is drinking with Micro's wife, Sarah, and you can tell that she wants him to kiss her. That whole scene had me as nervous as a fight scene because I was that scared about what would happen from that particular piece of interpersonal contact as I would have been from a fight breaking out. And they have great chemistry, right? And he really brought her excessively nice flowers. But what I loved, I mean, like, for Christ's sake, but what I loved is when he gets back to their hideout, what David is doing is like drinking heavily and not actually trying to instigate a fight. In fact, instead of actually having a fight, he like recognizes why the situation was the way it was, that both Sarah and Frank acted as best they could in this preposterous situation. And like they start sharing stories about how they met their wives, and I love it. Like, they're like, what is it? This is how we're dealing with this. This is how we're dealing with this. And it's getting drunk and sharing feelings is such a big improvement over the usual narrative, which would have been getting in a fight. Right.
Yeah. Because they really painted themselves into a corner with that whole storyline. Micro, he faked his own death because he thought it was the only way he could. Well, I mean, they did try to kill him.
They did try to shoot him,
and he fell off a pier or something, and he just swam away and hid and let his family think he was dead in hopes that this would keep the people that he and Frank are fighting from going after his family anymore, which is a terrible thing to do to your family. And in the same breath that it's really, that's a lot to do for your family. But it's also very cruel. And he's in a position where, now that Frank is kind of checking in on her or whatever and has gotten to know her, and they obviously have some feelings for each other, it's not like he can do anything about it. He can't, at least as far as he's concerned, for a long time. He can't just pop up and be like, hey, I'm alive. Sorry, please stop flirting with my friend, the insane vigilante who shot a ninja warrior for Daredevil. He can't do that, So they have the situation where it easily could have just devolved into like they're going to have a fight about a woman and they're going to have a falling out and blah blah blah. But they didn't. Like you said, they did something different and more interesting with it. And almost at every point in the show where they could have done something dull and stupid, they did something kind of cool or unexpected, or they just tried a little bit harder. And, I have this concept that I've used for many, many years about how there's certain roles and certain storylines in narrative fiction that basically exist as styrofoam packing peanuts. You have the thing that your show is about, that you want it to be about. You have the point B that you need your character to get to from point A. And you do a bunch of storylines and you introduce a bunch of supporting characters that exist just to make sure the show does the thing you want it to do, or to get the characters from where they are now to where you want them to go. And they don't do anything else. It's just they're inert. They're just like they just help you ship the show where you want it to go safely and on time. And it's a waste. You can make all those characters interesting. You can convert them from potential energy to kinetic energy. They're going to be there anyway, right? You need them to do all these things. Why not why not try harder than just having them do whatever the rote sort of tropey thing is for that particular sort of person to do. And there's so many instances, like just tiny little, very, very minor characters. Like there's some functionary, like he's a military guy, but he's a nebbishy guy. He's not like he's not doing wet work out in the field, who's involved in the upper echelons of this sort of drug and gun running conspiracy. And when you meet him, he's complaining to some woman about how hard it is to be as powerful as he is, and then she spills her wine, and then he like gets down on his hands and knees and licks it up, and you discover she's a dom.
It's so good.
Yeah, and it's like cool, I mean, the guy he has like maybe 10 minutes of screen time total, but they did something. He could have just been like just some obnoxious, like, just sort of like a boring, lame, snide prick.
Rote character, yeah.
Right, yeah, but then they
no, all the villains were good.
Right, and then they're like, all of a sudden we're going to talk about power exchange and how, like, people in powerful positions, like to be submissive sexually sometimes.
Although
like,
I'll tell you, I was livid when it turned out that they killed her. Like she was just fucking doing her job, and we find her with her neck sliced, and it's like, okay, there we have our required dead sex worker.
That's true. No, you're right.
But,
you're right.
yeah.
I mean, it's not what it's a thing they would do.
Oh yeah, it's yeah.
That's the. Then that raises the question, like, should they have tried harder with that? Should they have come at that from a different angle so you don't wind up, no matter how much it is the thing that those people would do, is there a way to do it that would help you avoid that unfortunate, like, dead sex worker kind of situation,
Well, I'll tell you, definitely a character who could have been perfunctory but did an excellent job of doubling, again, would be, Dina, played by Amber Rose Riva, who's the DHS agent who's, trying to follow up and catch up and figure out what's happening with Punisher and this season. And her motivation is that her partner in Afghanistan was killed, and there was clearly a cover-up, and her partner was an Afghani police officer. And Marvel has been on a roll of introducing people who are specifically like Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian as law enforcement folks as a way to sort of counterbalance the cast, and it's not necessarily the way any of these agencies actually look. Spencer Ackerman was talking about that on our Daredevil episode, but she's a great character. I loved her conversations with her mom, the therapist. They were super revealing. I didn't know that actress at all. And it was great to have like an actual Persian accent, like by an actual Persian person, like, and that's like the most Persian. I mean, she's from Persia. I mean, she's from Iran, right? But like, she's great. She's fabulous. But yeah, she was great.
Yeah,
too.
She came out of nowhere. You're right, Amber Rose Riva, and also pretty easy on the eyes, like most of the people in the show who are involved in romance and sexual subplots, and I don't want to drag us off in that direction if you're not ready to go there.
No, let's actually. That actually was one of my bullet points. Is like we should talk about that.
In a weird way, I don't think that's unusual for the Marvel Netflix thing. I mean, I think that Matt and Karen is pretty hot on Daredevil, to the extent that it's just tension there, and there's more tension with Frank and Karen Page, is played by Deborah Ann Wall, who has really, really proved that she's a dynamite actor in these shows. That's really, like, that scene in the elevator after they, like, get through, like, this whole fucking debacle and everyone gets killed, and they wind up, like, safe in an elevator for a second. They just kind of, like, lean on each other. It's like, woof! Man, that's something. And Bernthal has great chemistry with her, and he has great chemistry with Jamie Ray Newman, who plays David's wife, and she has great chemistry with Evan Moss Backrack, who plays David, and Amber Rose Riva has great chemistry with Ben Barnes. They have an incredibly hot sex scene at one point, and it's that happened in Luke Cage and it happened in Jessica Jones. it's just, you know, I mean, I'm into it, man. I mean, what do you want me to say? Like,
no, that's it. I mean, I think it's worth a shot. I personally think it's better than the other shows, frankly, when it came to that. Partially, like, I never bought Daredevil with Karen. And I don't blame the actors. I blame the writing on that. I mean, I really do agree. Deborah Ann Wall is amazing. And in a lot of moments, I dislike the character Karen in a way that I don't have a problem with disliking her. Like, I think it's not at all at odds with the material for that. But, you know, I think Deborah Ann Wall is fabulous. But, you know, Karen has a way of making everything about her, even when it's not. Like the bombing threats, like she, aside from her being a terrible journalist, like the way she decides that the bomb threats are actually about her rather than about the newspaper itself is just incredibly self-centered, but believable. People are like that. I can understand why she would, you know, decide that they were about her, even though they're not. Mm-hmm. At least that was my interpretation of it. But anyway, yeah, I just didn't buy her with Daredevil. And I thought that the show did those particularly well. I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of it. And you're right. It's hard to sort of explain why in any extensive detail, but they did. I don't know if those are your thoughts on Karen, but I would say that I thought some of the weaker thinking in this show was sort of around the politics with Karen. You know, the senator who's on his gun control thing it's not that politically intelligent how they wrote him. I thought that the TV interview with her and him was really realistic in the way it was bad, but I doubt that they intended it to be bad. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that the whole entire way gun control is framed in the show is pretty lazy thinking. I'm glad they remembered that she had a gun, and I believe everything Karen did was completely in character. Again, I'm not a big fan of a lot of things she does, even though I think she is doing a great job of performing them. But that is one of I think the stumbling blocks for the show.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, it may have been a mistake to address the issue at all, really, I think. I mean, I guess you kind of have to. It's the Punisher. He's the gun guy.
Yep.
But I don't know. I mean, Karen has a gun because people have tried to kill her multiple times, and in one of these times, she stole the person's gun and shot him with it. Mm-hmm. And fled. And at the time of the Punisher, during the events of the Punisher, nobody knows this. Right. It's her like darkest secret. And the reason she gets her back up about gun control is because having a gun makes her feel in control. And I think it would have been interesting for the series to dig into the way anxiety and trauma and just people who are susceptible to being afraid of a lot of shit gravitate towards you know, gun culture requires uncultivating enemies, and in Karen's particular case, she actually has enemies. But she's not dealing with that in a healthy way, in many respects. Mm-hmm. Certainly with, you know, lashing out at the gun control senator.
And, you know, whose own line of discussion was really weak, and I could have done it better.
Yeah, he was a phony baloney, right?
You could talk, and like the thing is, like, as much as I'm incredibly cynical about members of Congress, like, people are sincere in their desire for gun control, and you could have written that sincerely. But as I said, you know, I mean, my thing with Karen with the gun is, yeah, exactly. Of course, it makes sense that she has it, but we all know, well, at least you and I know statistically, that you're more likely to injure yourself or someone you love with a gun than you are to actually stop a crime. Right. So it would have been a great way to actually acknowledge that reality and use that in the story. And, you know, it is sort of a thing where we do get this amazing gun competency porn, as it were, from all of the actions done by Billy and Frank. Like, I mean, just what they're able to do is just, you look at it and you're like, damn, look at all those things they can do. But then you have to remind yourself, right, at the expense of everything else that's been going on around them. So I also see like why you might not want to have a thing where the woman is the one who's undermined with her ability to do it. But like, she's a civilian. She's a civilian. She's just going to freaking get herself shot. That's what happened. I want to talk a little bit about like the ways government agencies and CIA and military complex are played out here. There's this when Billy is inducting his new employees to working for his contractor company, he talks about, he basically sells his potential employees on their financial value. The government spent $50,000 training you. Are you making good on the investment the government made in you? And that's a political piece that I thought was incredibly smart and hadn't seen coming, and like wanted to applaud from the backbenches. Mm-hmm. I felt like that was an amazing way to sell participating in this immoral venture on well-intentioned people who are desperate and probably all completely traumatized.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that come up. It came up in Homecoming, where they talk about just like, just the tremendous... One of the ways they can kind of keep their hooks in you after you come home is by saying, look how much we value you. Look at the money we put into you, You're an investment that your government made, and it's, you have value as a commodity, like you're a car.
Yeah.
Or a tank, I suppose. And that's again, the show is very fast to and I think and did a better job of this, showing the way that capitalism and empire worked, hand in glove. I think that there's some private prison stuff in Luke Cage that I think was pretty clumsy and supervillainy. Like the private prison has like a mad scientist working in it. This doesn't do anything like that. It's a mercenary company run by a guy who was doing bad shit when he was in the military, and he's doing bad shit now that he's out of the military. But now he can make a lot more money doing it.
And there's people doing bad things at every agency.
Yes.
In NSA, in the police a bit, in the military, in the CIA, and I mean, and like the fact that Wolf actually is the one who points out that intelligence gained through torture is not usable because people will say anything. Mm-hmm. I was just like, yes, I'm glad you made that point, especially in the face of a show where people are about to torture each other for information for extended periods of time.
Right.
So it's sort of a weird thing because it's like Wolf is saying it and he's obviously a bad guy. Are we supposed to dismiss that, or are we supposed to say yes? Because then we do just sort of see all that torture going on and people getting information from it. And yet the key incident that starts Dina's quest is her partner getting tortured for bad evidence for no reason because of racism and greed.
Right. Yeah, and that's brutal. And Frank participated in that. And that's kind of the elephant in the room of the whole show. Before anything happened to his family, he was out there. There was it wasn't like, I wish I could have done something, but I would have been in danger. Like, no. Like, no more than anything else that anyone participates in a group. He was part of a unit that routinely kidnapped and tortured and then executed people. Routinely.
Yeah, and they say that in the show. They're like, and they call us the American Taliban, which I thought was a great touch.
Right.
Oh God, I mean, there's the sequence where you see the Anvil folks going after Punisher and Gunner at, Gunner basically being the person who took the tape of the illegal assassination of the completely innocent man. That whole scene, like you have the screen with multiple views of each of the mercenaries, what they're seeing as they're carrying out their mission. And the feel is so video game as each one of their like lights go black, but it's done in a way where you see that the person who's experiencing this as a video game is the man in charge. Like it's not a video game to the quote players, the men on the ground who are getting knocked off one by one, like we're watching The Predator in the jungle/woods of West Virginia. The video game is just for the man with a control fantasy, who I believe it's Wolf looking at this video. No, Wolf is already dead. It's Agent Orange looking at this video footage and having this control fantasy.
Right.
But I feel like that was a pretty deliberate choice to make it look like a first-person shooter video game.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's probably part and parcel of the show being aware of how the character functions similar to first-person shooters in culture as a sort of avatar of, fantasies of righteous, redemptive violence against others. Which is so fucking weird. Like, there's so many characters who are, who are cops or in the military or work for S.H.I.E.L.D., who aren't a maniac. And it's really it's really telling and frightening that so many cops love the Punisher, who specifically does not have sanction to do what he does, because they're all just fucking dying to do it. That's really troubling.
Yeah.
That's like the most, it's like seeing Freddy Krueger with a Blue Lives Matter sweater instead of the normal striped colors. It's like, why? You have cop characters. Like, get real behind Dirty Harry. You don't, or whoever. Like, you don't need that, but they want to go that extra mile.
Right.
Just that's how. God, they're just dying to be able to kill people, and it's very troubling. And I like that the show is able to make connections from what the show itself is and is about, this Marvel character that has wound up having this bizarre second life as a symbol of sort of unfettered state violence against people who aren't white, basically. And,
yeah, exactly. And that was really what I was scared about the show, is going to look like. Jumping in to say that Punisher co-creator Gary Conway has repeatedly talked about how it's wrong for cops to use the Punisher symbol. He just gave an interview to Sci-Fi where he said, quote, "It's as offensive as putting a Confederate flag on a government building," quote. And the thing is, I think the police deciding that this character, which is intended as a critique of the justice system, I mean, Gary Conway has specifically said in a whole lot of interviews that the character is a critique of the justice system, that the police deciding that this character is their hero says more about how the police view themselves than it does about the Punisher's success or failure as a character. So the police's embrace of Punisher as a symbol is an indictment of the police. It's not an indictment of the character, the Punisher. Like, even though they were definitely not going to, even if it was Punisher against gangsters, quote unquote, it wasn't, I mean, they weren't going to just cast brown people, but the way that is rendered in the minds of the public of white people is still read as being people of color.
Right. And I mean, honestly, Marvel has known, even since the 70s, not to just have their vigilante characters fight gangs of, monochromatic gangs, even if it's unrealistic.
Yeah.
When you look back at those comics, it's always like a rainbow coalition of dudes in vests with no shirts underneath, That's who they fight. And it's like they fight the warriors basically over and over and over again. And so it was clear that Marvel wasn't going to go in that direction. Marvel, I think, is generally relatively responsible about representation. If you dig any deeper than that, you run into trouble, I think, oftentimes. But
I mean, they're still scared to have any LGBTQ heroes.
That's a big thing. And then also, a giant corporation in the main is not going to make stuff that isn't generally compatible with the sort of prevailing headwinds. The CIA did a thing that tied in with this actual literal CIA, not just Martin Freeman's character, did a Black Panther Wakanda technology tie-in, like
the Northrop Grumman comic at New York Comic Con, which got pulled because people freaked out at them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they go too far and they fuck up. And as you mentioned before, the shows always go out of, even though I think on every single Marvel Netflix show, cops and intelligence agencies and the military are well, if not overrepresented among the bad guys. Always. It's always like entire precincts are corrupt and like basically serve as like the Kingpin's private army. Entire FBI units have been compromised. Entire military units like roam around killing people on behalf of like their like weird drug lord generals. There's the prison turned Luke Cage into the a superhuman by like using him as a human guinea pig and putting him in gladiator fights, and on and on and on and on and on. Even politicians are corrupt. They take a very, they're not trying to make you think that like the authorities are always on your side by any stretch of the imagination, but they do, like you said, they always make sure that there are some good cops, there are some good members of DHS agents or CIA agents, and they're usually not white, which is nice, but also you're dodging something here.
Yeah.
You're trying to get around the way power actually manifests, exceptions aside. You're doing the hire more women guards thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And that only gets you so far. But I do think that they, baby steps, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I remember even thinking in Daredevil, the first season of Daredevil, like, the plot is that Kingpin wants to gentrify, and the NYPD is helping him, and Daredevil has to stop it. And I was like, that's kind of wild. You know?
Yeah. As someone who did organizing for affordable housing in Hell's Kitchen, I was very, very pleased to see personal struggles brought in a larger scale in season 1.
Who
was
amongst
like,
us
Bloomberg,
cannot relate? Yep. Yeah.
Bloomberg supervillain. It's these things all really straddle those difficult lines. I also think this show was just really well constructed in terms of how the different pieces were put together. I have a big note that says Chekhov's K-bar, which is connected to, you have Frank trying to do a tough talk to David's son, who's like super traumatized and becoming a bully because of his dad's death. He pulls the knife on him to show what it'd be like to have a knife pulled on you. And then, the boy reveals like actually he's suicidal basically because he's in so much pain. And then they cut from that knife to Billy strapping on a knife to go into where he thinks Frank is going to be and get into one of the show's many warehouse fights. Mm-hmm. And we know because, Punisher is talking about the importance of always having your knife with you and how that operates. And then Billy is putting his on like, okay, the knife, the K-bar is going to fit into the fight scene in some good way. And then it does. It's used in a reveal and it's perfect. Like, I like being able to see those pieces in advance because it's a well-constructed like thing to be able to watch and follow. Another really beautiful piece of this, which I didn't know. Unfortunately, the fact that Billy was going to become Jigsaw was spoilered for me before I saw it, and I really am wondering if I would have seen that particular thing coming or not. I give mad props to my husband, who, for all of his current lefty politics, was a big fan of Punisher when he was a young teenager living on Long Island. As soon as there's a shattered mirror in that carousel scene, he says, he's going to be Jigsaw, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I said, yes, you are correct, my dear. But you know what book the internet revealed to me, and I confirmed the book that Billy is reading when in one of the Kandahar flashback scenes, picture of Dorian Gray.
Outstanding.
I mean, on the nose, but wonderfully on the nose.
Yep. I mean, I guess I knew because I think I looked up the character's name and I was like, oh, it's Jigsaw.
Right, because that is who he was there. But I didn't. I just went into this being like, "Fuck it, I'm going to watch The Punisher now," because two people whose opinions I trust told me to.
Yeah, I mean, and you never can tell. I mean, obviously, the shows will do things very differently than the source material sometimes. Like the example I think of is in season 1 of Daredevil. Things work out for Ben Urich very differently than they do for Ben Urich as a character in the comics. Just for example.
Oh yeah, much to my chagrin.
Right. Yeah. But you mentioned that your husband's lefty politics, but he used to be in The Punisher. I dig The Punisher too for a couple reasons. First, personally, I have played it. I went for many years without playing any video games at all. I started playing video games again, and I discovered my fighting style in any game, whether it's Super Smash Bros. Or Wolfenstein or anything where it requires fighting. I'm a brawler. I get in there, and I want to fuck people up, even if it means like taking damage myself. So Punisher is a character that I connect with in that sort of visceral, like, vicarious way of, you know, what does art based in physical action and violence say to me or do for me or whatever. So I dig him in that way. The second way, the Punisher's costume is so goth.
Yeah, it's pretty flawless.
It's like, that's the depressing thing to me. I mean, other than what it says about our decaying society, about Punisher logos becoming this sort of, basically like an Iron Cross or something, is that it's a fucking skull on a black outfit. Like, that's...
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said to him when I saw all these like junior high pictures of like multiple Punisher t-shirts, I'm like, well, of course you like Punisher because he, much like you, is named Frank and wears a black t-shirt with skulls on it.
Right.
Which,
exactly.
Which he wears to this day because he's a metalhead. So yeah, and it's always been, one of Frank's points about my husband, as opposed to fictional Frank, a point about his appreciation of Punisher as a younger man was that, if you're growing up watching 80s action movies, he's the same as any character Arnold is playing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did not grow up watching 80s action movies. I only got into them as an adult, and I love them now. I'm a huge fan of. I really enjoy a lot of them, and they're a lot more politically complex than most people give any of them credit for. But I wasn't drawn to that iconography. Well, I love skulls because goth, yes, but I wasn't drawn to Punisher iconography when I was younger because I was like, here we have comics in which we have characters who are using violence in badass ways to solve problems, but are not doing it in the same, like, I just didn't like that particular way of organizing the structure, and Punisher just read as more racist to me than the others. I'm like, why Punisher when X-Men, But yeah,
I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I'm not saying that if you like Punisher, your politics are bad. I'm just saying that that's often a thing that goes together.
Yeah, that's not determinative necessarily, but it's maybe a warning sign. I don't know.
Exactly. But perfect.
Here's what I will say about this show. It was made by Steve Lightfoot, who is an alum of Hannibal, one of the gothest shows ever aired, which has spawned, notably since then, American Gods, Channel Zero, by Nick Antosca, who's another Hannibal alum, and this show. And, like, in a way, I feel like it's reclaiming Punisher for the goths a little bit. Just a little bit.
Oh, that's so good. And look, it has beautiful aesthetics. I just wanted to shout out, there's a scene near the end, I think it's maybe like the third to last episode, where Punisher has just, or maybe second to last, has just like brutalized every last one of the guys Billy sent to get him in his hideout. And he's sitting on the floor. He's talking on a dead man's cell phone. And the floor is like hideous. And he is just so bloody and brutalized. And it looks like a Tomas Giorello painting.
Yeah.
It was just like this beautiful bit of art there.
Yep.
They did that detail, and they cared enough to, to share that with us. And like they 9 Inch Nails moment, they, like the whole thing with Lewis trying to get the caged parakeets to leave the apartment of the guard who he just killed, and the parakeets staying within there. I mean, Happiness and Slavery is a reference to something else, but I'm just like, my mind was like, I'm hearing the 9 Inch Nails song right now.
Right.
And the parakeets don't want to leave because they're tame and it's cold outside. And why would they leave the safe space that they've known to go to this dangerous, unknown outdoors of New York world? One other piece of music, actually, and I thought that the show had way less music than I thought it was going to, and Marvel shows in general could do a lot more. I think that would be worth them putting some money into, frankly. Punisher is playing the guitar, his acoustic guitar, very soulfully in various moments throughout the show, in a lovely touch. I kept expecting him to start playing One by Metallica, and I kept being disappointed when he didn't. And I wasn't sure, like, on the one hand, I expected him to play One because he is approximately our age and joined the military and is a white guy from Queens. So, of course, he listens to Metallica. Like, I know how this works. I have, like, I know you all. We're friends. It's okay. But he didn't. and then I'm like, why is this in my head? And then Netflix, when I was doing some rewatching, played the trailer, and I said, oh, they actually used bars of One in the trailer, the opening notes. Mm-hmm. But then they didn't use it in the show. But I spent the whole show expecting that to happen. I don't know if you had the similar experience to that.
They should have set an entire hallway fight to the song in its entirety. That's what I would have done.
But the thing with Metallica, and I've written a bit about this on Twitter, and I should probably write an actual essay at some point, is Metallica, most of their albums are incredibly cynical about government and anti-war. Like, one of the big takeaway messages from Metallica's Oeuvre is that you shouldn't join the military. It's a bad idea because they don't care about you and you'll be brutalized. And what's incredibly popular music amongst white guys of a certain generation who are in the military? Metallica.
Right. Metallica has shifting valence with regards to war. Then they did Don't Tread on Me, the album after they did One. So
that's satire.
Don't Tread on Me flags on the cover. I've never thought it was satire.
I thought it was satire.
I reviewed the Injustice for All reissue recently for Pitchfork, and but I did not review the Black Album. So I'm out of. I have not done my research on the Black Album, and you may well be right.
I'm intrigued, and I'm looking forward to reading your piece. But I actually listened to Injustice for All a lot when I was getting ready for this podcast, even though it's actually the Metallica album I listened to least. Well, I'm not counting the new ones that nobody likes, but of the classic ones. Anyway, so Metallica sidebar. I don't know. I do feel like that would have been a great song to soundtrack the White Buffalo scene, but the White Buffalo song scene did really work well. I mean, that really is a brutal and powerful piece in there. Mm-hmm. There's one last thing about superheroes that I do want to hit on, which is Agent Orange. He is like, I love that they bring out that he's the Rollins CIA agent, who's like the big bad of the season, is, comes from a rich family who's always profited from military, who's always been part of that military industrial complex. And he's this man who wants other men to do his work for him. And, he begins, you sort of feel like he's this like yet another sort of nebbishy government evil, like the banality of evil kind of guy. But as the season progresses, he really starts to lose his shit. And he has his like face, the scars on his face. For most of the time we see him because Punisher punches him out earlier. But the way he's lit in those last episodes, he looks like a World War II Nazi supervillain from the Wonder Woman comics. And by the last episodes, he has gone full supervillain monologue. Like, he starts to deliver actual supervillain monologues. And I didn't mind because they had really built towards that. It actually, I'm like, yeah, that feels earned. But I just couldn't stop thinking, like, wow, you really do like Baron von Unter, whatever, from Wonder Woman. Not from the movie, I mean from the comics.
Right.
That was just the face. Which brings me to, I think we should wrap up talking about season 2. As much as the entire story, leading towards Ben Barnes, Billy Russo becoming Jigsaw is completely all in sense. Like, I am always, or rather, I've been trained by those more sensitive to this shit than me to be cautious of facial disfigurement being used as a metaphor for revealing the fact that someone is secretly bad all this time. Mm-hmm. I didn't read Rollins that way. But I don't know how it's going to be with Jigsaw in season 2. And I would note that in the season 2 trailer we've seen, I think that is all shot in a studio to promote season 2 and does not reflect anything we're actually going to watch.
Uh-huh. I haven't
you
even
might
seen
know
it.
More about that.
No, I haven't even seen the trailer for it.
Okay. Well, basically in it we do see Jigsaw without the bandages on, and he basically looks like a hot guy with some well-placed facial scars, which would certainly be a major life change, but is not what the level of of injury that the show set him up for, or that the comics have. And I can't decide if I think it's good for Billy to still be handsome because I don't like the idea of disfigurement as a metaphor for somebody being evil, or if I think it's a cop-out. Like, I don't know how I feel. We'll have to wait and see. But I am cautious about, and I'm looking forward to getting opinions from people with like just facial disfigurement. Like, how do you feel about how this is handled in the show? So
yeah,
that in mind, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember from when I worked at Wizard, I think there was an internal debate as to whether Dr. Doom's facial scars should really be horrific, and so, or if it's minor and it's just his vanity.
Yeah.
That's a good question. And I can see them maybe, given what we know about, I haven't seen the trailer, but given what we know about the character, just even looking a little bit roughed up, I'm sure would bother him tremendously.
It would stop people from calling him pretty, which is one of his triggers, though. Like, if you're him and you're going from being called pretty to looking more like badass, but not but like still handsome, like that. I mean, anything happening to you that you're not in control of is trauma. But like that, actually, I don't know. We'll have to see. So yeah, what are you thinking about for season 2?
The main thing I was just thinking is that this time this year there were 6 different Marvel Netflix shows, and The Punisher's the last man standing. That's amazing to me. I understand why it's happening corporate-wise. I don't know. I don't know. I just hope it's good. I guess I don't go into it with too many expectations for these kinds of things, I just kind of sit down, start watching, start taking notes, and be like, all right, I'm ready to be entertained. And I find professionally that's usually the best way to approach it, because then I'm not reviewing something based on the idea that I formulated in my head, and which is unfair and sometimes much less interesting than what I get. Sometimes it's better, but I'd rather just kind of. I like going in as cold as possible, and I've always been that way for really almost anything. So
yeah, that's usually how I approach it too. But this trailer came on autoplay, and so I ended up watching it.
Very end of the show, I think it's the last line. I haven't revisited it very often. I should have just reread everything that I wrote. That's very convenient when you want to refresh your memory, as if you reviewed every single episode. Is that he says, "I'm scared," which again flies in the face of what people go to the Punisher for culturally. They want a guy who's not afraid. He's going to stand up to all the... They want Travis Bickle, basically, but to treat him like a hero instead of a monster. And the show just like... he's in a support group saying that he's scared. Like, that's fucking wild to me. That's really wild to me. I've never seen the Punisher do that or say that in any circumstance. And, and I don't think it's letting him off the hook. I don't think it's trying to make him be like a lovable, that you have to support his kill crazy rampages because he's hurting inside. I do think that the show, so many of those real massacre sequences, he's basically like Jason, or Michael Myers, just slashing his way through ranks of people in a very violent and horror-driven way. So they want you to think that it's horrific. I think that's very clear. But to end on this note anyway, and to sort of try and and the punctuation mark you're putting on the whole season is that, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of this kind of mindset stems from being afraid, whether you're traumatized or just afraid of other kinds of people in a sort of racistly neurotic way, or you're anxious and paranoid and conspiratorial about the world and people being out to get you. Like, that's where violence festers in that, or can at least the mentality that condones violence against the right people. And so I don't think it's trying to have your cake and eat it too. I think it's just trying to bake a better cake.
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well said. I mean, just the fact that Frank, we end the series him saying, for the first time in a long time, I don't have a war to fight, and I'm scared. And he's in like talk therapy, basically.
Yeah.
What the world needs now. And I would also say, I mean, as an aside, I'm going to cover season 2, and I'm talking actually. I'm trying to find some veterans to actually talk about the series with. Most of my friends who are vets did not watch the show because they thought it would be too violent for them. Mm-hmm. Like, that was not like a critique of the show from them. They weren't saying this show is bad and shouldn't exist. But they were just saying, I personally can't watch it because it's too violent.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining me. Where should our listeners find your works and upcoming Punisher writings for the etc.?
Well, I'll be covering season 2 for Decider.com again, so you can stay tuned for that when the show starts. I'm excited to start watching it. I have the screeners. And I haven't started watching them yet, though. You can find me on Twitter at @TheSeanTCollins, and you can go to my website, which is SeanTCollins.com. Sometimes I'm a little slow, but I do post links to every single thing that I write for all the other outlets I write for, and there's quite a few. And I am currently, my big project this year, speaking of 80s action movies, which we were at the beginning of the podcast, I am going to write an essay a day about the film Roadhouse.
I love it. They're amazing. I've enjoyed every one of them. I'm so glad that I ended up watching Roadhouse like recently, like for the first time. Folks, like I don't care if you care about this movie or not. Like, just as writing and thinking about film, I freaking love these essays. Go read the Roadhouse essays on Sean's website.
Thank you very much. Yeah, they are spoilery a bit, obviously, but you can't spoil Roadhouse. The experience of Roadhouse, actually sitting and watching Roadhouse, is unspoilable. The more you hear about it, the more you just like, I gotta see this movie. And then I've never known anyone to be disappointed by it, ever. It's magnificent. I don't even know what to say. I'm writing about it every day for a year, so I guess that kind of tells you how I feel about it.
Yeah, I love that kind of exercise, and I'm enjoying reading it greatly.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again. For our listeners, I don't know which order these episodes will be released in. It's possible the next thing you'll hear from me is an interview with comics writer Leah Williams, who's been doing amazing work writing X-Men titles. Or it's possible this is airing after that. I don't know. But we will be covering season 2 as well. And thank you for joining us. I'm on Twitter, Ilana Brooklyn, ELANA_Brooklyn. graphicpolicy.com for all your comics news and reviews. And thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to having you next time.
Thanks,
Keep
Alana.
it geeky.
You
Thank
too.
You.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.